I came to my ex's engagement party knowing I shouldn't. The moment she saw me, she smiled and said, "Who invited her?" The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. For 1 second, I felt small all over again. Then the doors opened, and my alpha wife stepped inside. That was the moment everything changed. "Who invited her?" my ex asked with a laugh sharp enough to carry over the orchestra, the champagne fountain, and the low, polite hum of old money pretending not to enjoy a public humiliation. The ballroom at the Valmaire Grand seemed to tilt toward her voice. Heads turned. Conversations slowed. Jewels flashed in candlelight. And suddenly, I was standing in the center of a room I had already regretted entering, with every eye drifting toward me the way eyes always drift toward weakness, scandal, or blood. I kept my posture straight. That was the first thing my mother had taught me before she died. If they want to watch you fall, make them work for it. Celeste Armand stood near the floral arch arranged for her engagement announcement, one hand linked elegantly through the arm of her fiancé, looking exactly like the kind of woman who had never heard the word no and believed that made her special rather than insufferable. Her black gown clung to her like privilege. Her dark hair spilled over one bare shoulder. Her diamond collar rested against her throat, with the kind of effortless arrogance that made people assume she had been born exquisite, rather than carefully manufactured by money and pressure and the constant threat of losing both. She smiled at me as if she had invited me here only to see whether I would dare come. Then she lifted her chin slightly and repeated, "No, really. Who invited her?" The first wave of laughter spread in a small, precise circle around her. Not loud, not vulgar. The kind of laughter cultivated in private schools and charity galas. The kind designed to be deniable later. Vivian Sorel, her fiancé, gave me a slow, sympathetic glance so false it was almost art. "Oh," she murmured. "This must be the ex." The ex, not my name, not a history, not a person, just a role in Celeste's story. I folded my hands around my clutch to keep them from shaking. "Congratulations on your engagement." Celeste's mouth curved wider. "Thank you." Then, as if the room were not yet paying enough attention, she added, "I was surprised to see you here, Nora. I didn't know you still moved in circles like this." A few nearby guests glanced down at my dress. It was silver, tasteful, fitted properly, and still plain enough beside them to be interpreted as an apology. I had borrowed it from my friend Mira because she insisted I needed something fierce and clean and impossible to pity. At the moment, I felt very easy to pity. "Apparently I do," I said. Vivian's lips twitched. "Did you come alone?" There it was, the real Blade. Not class, not clothes, not belonging, loneliness. Because they knew exactly where to press. Celeste knew best of all. For 2 years I had loved her in secret, and then in shadows, and then in rooms she always locked after entering. For 2 years she had called me her future when we were alone, and a complication whenever anyone important might overhear. And when her family informed her there would be no future, no inheritance, no board seat, and no mercy if she insisted on choosing a middle-class Omega with a dead mother, a retired schoolteacher father, and no suitable pedigree, she had not hesitated long enough to call it courage. She had left. That was all. People romanticized betrayal because they preferred beautiful words to simple ones. She left. And then she sent legal documents, silence, and a generous transfer I returned untouched. Now she looked at me with the same polished cruelty she used whenever she wanted to remind herself she had won. "I asked," she said sweetly, "because I can't imagine who thought this would be comfortable for you." The orchestra continued playing something lush and meaningless. A server passed between us with sparkling wine. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered my name. I should have turned and walked straight out. Instead, I heard myself say, "Comfort clearly wasn't the purpose." That sharpened her expression for an instant. I had spoken back. Celeste never enjoyed resistance unless she was the one staging it. Vivian laid 2 fingers on Celeste's wrist, smiling for the audience now gathering in casual rings around us. "Oh, darling, let her stay. It's a big night. I'm sure she only wanted to see what she missed." The laughter came easier this time. A warm ripple. A practiced cruelty. I could smell my own distress rising in the air despite every breathing technique I had ever learned, a soft omega sweetness edged with humiliation. God, I hated that. I hated the instinctive honesty of scent. I hated that the room was full of alphas pretending not to notice, betas pretending not to understand, and omegas pretending my embarrassment was a choice I had made in public. Celeste stepped closer. Only I could hear the next part. "You should have stayed home." And there it was. Not mockery for entertainment. Not even revenge. Just ownership. The old reflex in her. The need to decide when I entered a room, when I spoke, when I was wanted, and when I was not. Something in my chest went cold. For one terrible second, I was back in her penthouse bathroom 2 years ago, mascara ruined, trying to understand why loving someone openly was a larger crime than promising forever privately. Then I remembered who I had become after that bathroom. Not all at once. Not elegantly. But still. I lifted my chin. "You mistake me for someone who still waits for your permission." The words landed between us like broken glass. Celeste's smile thinned. Vivian glanced between us with fresh interest. Around us, the nearest guests leaned subtly closer. Conflict was the true currency of rooms like this. "How brave," Celeste said softly. "But then heartbreak does make some people theatrical." I almost laughed. I almost cried. I did neither. I turned. If I left now, it would still hurt. But it would hurt facing the door instead of her. I had taken only 3 steps when the ballroom doors opened, not dramatically, not with a crash. They opened with the smooth, quiet authority of people used to entering spaces that had already been prepared for them by fear. Conversation stuttered. The orchestra lost a note. Even before I looked, I felt it. A shift in alpha presence so immediate and immense that the air itself seemed to draw taut. 4 women in black suits stepped in first, broad-shouldered, earpieces hidden, expressions flat as marble. Security, not rented, not decorative, the real kind. And then the woman behind them entered, and the ballroom forgot me completely for the first time all evening. Aurelia Voss did not walk like a socialite. She walked like a verdict. Tall, dark-haired, severe in a midnight coat draped over a fitted black gown, she moved with a stillness so controlled it made everyone else look restless and underbred. A silver wolf pin glimmered at her throat. Long gloves covered both hands. There was no glitter on her, no loud display of wealth. But the room parted around her as if money itself had learned to step aside. Someone near the orchestra whispered her name. Another guest inhaled sharply. Then the recognition spread. Aurelia Voss, widow, strategist, chairwoman of Voss Security Holdings, daughter of a dynasty old enough not to brag. The kind of alpha tabloids called cold because they mistook privacy for the absence of feeling. Her gaze traveled once across the room and found me immediately. Everything in me stopped. The world narrowed to that look. The old panic. The fresh humiliation. The impossible relief. Her face changed. Only slightly. A softening no one would have noticed unless they had lived for scraps of it. I had. She crossed the ballroom toward me. The room did not merely watch. It recalculated. Celeste did too. I heard her breath catch. I heard Vivian whisper, "Is that?" "Yes," Celeste answered, too late and too quietly. Aurelia stopped beside me. I caught the scent of storm rain and cedar, and something cleanly metallic beneath it. The scent that had wrapped itself around my sleep for the last 8 months, until I could no longer imagine safety without it. Her eyes searched my face. Not the room, not the spectacle. Me. Then she turned to Celeste with a level expression and asked, "Is there a problem?" Silence hit the ballroom so hard it rang. Celeste recovered first, because of course she did. She smiled the way rich people smile when cornered by someone richer. "No problem at all." Aurelia's gaze returned to me. Her voice lowered a fraction. "Did I keep you waiting, wife?" The room stopped breathing. Even I forgot how for a second. Wife. Not a lie in the technical sense. Not entirely. But the way she said it, the ease of it, the claim of it in public, struck through me harder than any formal vow had. We had married fast, privately, under circumstances complicated enough to become a legend if anyone important ever learned the details. A legal marriage? Yes. A strategic union? Yes. A contract born out of necessity, survival, and a terrible season in both our lives. But public acknowledgement had never been promised. Protection had, kindness had, in her own restrained way, dignity had. Yet she stood in the center of my ex's glittering trap and called me wife as if she had never intended to call me anything else. I heard my own voice only after it left me. "You're right on time." Her gloved hand reached for mine, steady, warm through the leather, possessive without performance. Celeste stared at our joined hands as if the sight physically offended her. "Nora," she said, "you didn't mention you were married." "You didn't ask," I said. Vivian gave a little breath of disbelief. Aurelia turned slightly toward Celeste. "My wife is not obliged to report her life to you." The title again. My wife. Each use of it built something in my ribs I did not trust enough to name. Celeste crossed one arm over herself. "We have history." Aurelia's expression did not change. "So I gathered." Her tone made it sound like history could be filed under irrelevant. Celeste was not used to irrelevance. "It was a private conversation." Aurelia let her gaze drift across the cluster of onlookers, then back to Celeste. "Humiliation is rarely private when curated for an audience." 3 people looked down immediately. Vivian straightened, clearly trying to recover the room. "Now really, everyone's being a little sensitive." Aurelia finally looked at her. It was a simple look. Quiet. Mild. Vivian visibly lost color. Something vicious and exhausted in me nearly laughed. I had known for months that Aurelia frightened powerful people by doing less than other alphas did, while somehow feeling far more dangerous. Tonight I understood why. Celeste's mother appeared from the edge of the crowd like a woman who could smell family disgrace through 6 walls. Impeccable hair, ivory silk. A smile sharpened by 30 years of controlling damage. "Lady Voss," she said, dipping her head ever so slightly. "What an unexpected pleasure." Aurelia inclined hers in return. "Mrs. Armand." "What brings you to our celebration?" Aurelia's fingers tightened once around mine. "I came for Nora." Not with her, not to observe. For Nora. That landed harder than a threat. Mrs. Armand's eyes flicked to me, then back to our hands, and for the first time all evening I saw true alarm. She understood 2 things instantly. First, her daughter had publicly insulted the wrong woman. Second, I was no longer unprotected. She laughed lightly, badly. "How lovely. We didn't realize you were acquainted." "We're married," Aurelia said. No raised voice, no emphasis, just fact. The crowd rippled. Some guests tried to disguise their reaction by reaching for champagne. Others failed. Mrs. Armand's smile froze. Celeste's face had gone very still. I knew that stillness. It meant she was furious enough to break things later. Good. Then perhaps, Aurelia continued, you can explain why my wife was made unwelcome. Every eye in the room turned to Mrs. Armand. Not Celeste, her mother. Because social cruelty is often a family business and everyone knew it. Mrs. Armand's expression sharpened on her daughter. Celeste. It should have satisfied me to watch Celeste struggle for an answer. Instead, I felt only tired, more tired than angry. That surprised me. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways in darker months. Sometimes she begged. Sometimes I won beautifully. Sometimes I destroyed her with a single sentence. In none of those fantasies did I feel this hollow, this calm, this uninterested in her excuses. It was a misunderstanding, Mrs. Armand said quickly. Aurelia looked at me, not because she needed permission, because she was giving me the choice. And that, more than anything, straightened my spine. No, I said. The room shifted toward me. Celeste flinched, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She invited me here to humiliate me. The words were clean. They did not shake. I felt Aurelia's approval in the quiet pressure of her hand. Celeste found her voice. That's dramatic. Then deny it, I said. She opened her mouth, closed it. Because she could not. There had been too many witnesses, too much delight in her own cruelty. Mrs. Armand's composure cracked at the edges. Aurelia's guards said nothing, moved nowhere, and somehow made the entire room feel watched. Aurelia stepped half a pace closer to me. We're leaving. Mrs. Armand nodded too quickly. Of course. Celeste's eyes locked on mine. There it was then. Not regret, not grief, shock. Real shock that I might leave her ballroom as the protected one. That the story she had staged around me was no longer hers to control. As Aurelia turned with me toward the doors, Celeste said my name. I stopped. So did the room. I looked back. She stood beneath the crystal chandelier with her fiancé and her flowers and her family, and all the expensive light in the world. And for the first time, she looked smaller than memory had made her. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked. There were 100 meanings behind it. That I had married. That I had survived. That someone like Aurelia Voss had chosen to claim me in public when Celeste never had. I answered the only truth I cared to give her. You were never someone I could tell. Then I left. The doors closed behind us on a wave of whispers. The corridor beyond the ballroom was dimmer, quieter, lined with mirrors and vases large enough to hide inside. My knees nearly gave out at once. Aurelia caught me before I could stumble. One hand braced my waist. The other moved to my elbow. Easy, she said. The softness of her tone almost undid me more than the ballroom had. I laughed once, ugly and breathless, then pressed my fingers to my eyes as tears threatened in a rush too humiliating to name. I'm sorry. Her whole body stilled. For what? For that. I made a helpless motion toward the ballroom doors behind us, all chandeliers and cruelty and ghosts. For dragging you into some ridiculous public scene. Aurelia removed one glove with slow efficiency and cupped my face in her bare hand. Warm palm, cool rings, steady. You did not drag me anywhere, she said. I came because you asked if I would attend with you and I was late answering. Then Mira called and informed me I had approximately 12 minutes to prevent a murder. A startled laugh escaped me through the tightness in my chest. That sounds like Mira. She was very direct. She usually is. Aurelia's thumb brushed beneath my eye, catching a tear before it fell. The gesture was so tender that something fragile in me bent dangerously. I should have arrived sooner, she said. You were in a board meeting. I left. The simplicity of it. No grand declaration. No martyrdom, just fact. I searched her face. You left a board meeting. Yes. For me. Yes, Nora. The way she said my name should have been illegal. Like patience. Like possession. Like a promise too restrained to defend itself, and therefore all the more convincing. I looked down because looking at her directly felt unbearable. My scent was still unsettled, embarrassed, bright with residual hurt. Any alpha could read it. Aurelia did not comment. She simply shifted closer until her storm-cool scent wrapped around mine and quieted the worst of it. I hate that she saw me like that, I whispered. Aurelia's jaw tightened once. I hate that she made you stand there like prey for sport. She always liked an audience. That suggests weakness, not strength. I exhaled. There it was again, the precise violence of Aurelia's opinions. Never loud, always fatal. Down the hall, one of her guards stepped discreetly away to give us more privacy. The hotel staff had become suddenly invisible, as luxury staff always do when they sense emotions too expensive to interrupt. Aurelia tilted my chin up. Can you walk? Yes. Do you want to go home? The word home caught somewhere painful in my ribs, because home was no longer my apartment above the pharmacy, no longer the small life I had defended after Celeste left. Home had become the Voss residence with its quiet halls, winter garden, old books, impossible security, and one dark-haired alpha who never raised her voice and somehow rearranged the emotional climate of every room she entered. Yes, I said. Good. She slipped her glove back on, then offered me her arm instead of taking my hand again. Public propriety. Private care. That was her. I took it. As we walked toward the elevators, my pulse gradually slowed. The mirrored walls reflected us side by side. Her black, my silver. Her composure, my disarray. Her impossible elegance, my effort not to collapse. Strangers would have assumed power and fragility. They would have been partly right. What they would have missed was how hard I had worked to become someone who could stand beside a woman like her without feeling borrowed. We reached the private lift Aurelia had clearly arranged in advance. Of course she had. One of her guards pressed the call button. The doors opened almost immediately. Inside, the light was gold and flattering, and too intimate for the rawness still burning in my chest. Aurelia waited until the doors closed before she spoke again. Did she touch you? I blinked. What? In there. Her gaze remained on the descending floor numbers. Did Celeste touch you in a way you did not want? The question was so direct it startled me. No. Aurelia nodded once. Good. The lift continued downward in silence. Not awkward. Never awkward with her. Only quiet enough for truth. When we reached the underground garage, a black car waited already running. Another thing arranged before I knew I would need it. Aurelia guided me into the back seat and followed. The city lights outside the tinted windows blurred into silver streaks as the driver pulled away. Only then, cocooned in leather and soft dim lighting and the scent of rain on her skin, did I allow myself to shake. Aurelia noticed at once. She took off both gloves, set them aside, and opened one arm without a word. Not demanding, not pitying, making space. I moved before pride could stop me. The second I leaned into her, the last of my control snapped. No sobbing, nothing dramatic. Just a wrecking, helpless trembling that started in my shoulders and spread through my entire body. Her arm tightened around me. One hand settled at the back of my neck. The other rested between my shoulder blades, broad and warm and devastatingly gentle. She said nothing for several minutes. She knew enough now to understand that comfort offered too early sometimes feels like an audience. So she simply held me. Outside, The city streamed by in blue and gold. Inside, I tried not to fall apart in expensive silence. Eventually, I managed. I didn't think it would still hurt this much. Aurelia's hand moved once, slow up and down my spine. Some wounds heal into weather. I lifted my head slightly. That sounds like something your grandmother would say. It is. That almost made me smile. Lady Sabine Voss was 90, terrifying, and inexplicably fond of me. She had once compared most of society to over-decorated wolves with weak jaws. I had adored her instantly. I thought I was over Celeste, I admitted. Aurelia's gaze lowered to me. Being over someone and being unaffected by cruelty are not the same thing. My throat tightened. Because of course that was the distinction. Of course she would cut to the center of it with one sentence while I had spent 2 years muddling the difference. She made me feel like I had imagined everything, I whispered. The relationship, the promises, how serious it was. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering whether I was foolish from the beginning. Aurelia's expression sharpened. No. The force in that one syllable made me still. You were loved inadequately by a coward, she said. That is not the same as being foolish. The car seemed to become too small for the feeling that moved through me then. Not relief. Something deeper. More dangerous. A tenderness so sharp it bordered on grief. Because there are certain sentences you do not realize you have been starving for until someone places them in your hands as if they should have been yours all along. I looked away toward the window before she could read too much in my face. Too late, probably. Aurelia missed little. 8 months ago, when we married, I had assumed our arrangement would remain exactly that. Respectful, mutually beneficial, clear in boundaries. I needed legal and social protection after an inheritance dispute on my father's side unexpectedly drew public attention toward me and made me a target for exactly the sort of predatory propositions wealthy alphas considered practical. Aurelia needed a wife for reasons she had explained with calm precision and several pages of legal language that somehow still felt kinder than most marriage proposals I had heard about in our circles. There were clauses. There were terms. There were escape routes. There were no illusions. And yet slowly, horribly, beautifully, the illusion had become the only part missing. Because living with Aurelia Voss meant learning the shape of care stripped of vanity.
Before we get into the story, thank you so much for being here and supporting my channel. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so please tell me in the comments, and also let me know what kind of story you want next. And if you'd like to support me, the best way is by commenting, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel.
The way she left the tea I liked in the winter garden before dawn, if she knew I had nightmares. The way she listened all the way to the end when I spoke, even when the subject was trivial. The way she asked before touching me, except when I was in distress, and even then only in the quietest possible ways. The way she never once made me feel like an accessory, a liability, or a role she had assigned me. I had not intended to love her. I was beginning to suspect intention had never been part of the process. The car turned through the gates of the Voss estate. Security lights swept once across the drive and then dimmed. The house rose ahead in dark stone and warm windows, more fortress than mansion from the outside, more sanctuary than either from within. Home. Again that word. Again that ache. Inside, the staff vanished tactfully after murmured greetings. Aurelia dismissed the guards with a look. We climbed the main staircase in silence. Halfway up, she asked, "Do you want to be alone?" I considered lying. Instead, I said, "No." Good. She led me not toward our separate suites, but toward the winter garden. The room glowed softly under hanging lamps, all glass walls and night-blooming jasmine and the faint sound of the fountain in the center. This was where I came when I could not sleep. Aurelia knew. Of course she knew. She removed her coat and draped it over a chair, then unfastened the silver wolf pin at her throat. Without the coat, she looked somehow even more severe. All strong lines and dark silk and controlled power. She crossed to the sideboard, poured water, and handed me a glass. I took it gratefully. My hands were steadier now. "Thank you," I said. "For the rescue or the water?" "Both." Aurelia sat across from me on the curved settee. The fountain murmured between us. Moonlight traced the glass. It should have felt formal. It did not. This room had witnessed too many honest hours already. "She knew exactly how to hurt you," Aurelia said. Not a question. I nodded. "She always did." "You loved her?" Again, not a question. "Yes." Aurelia inclined her head slightly. Not jealousy, not discomfort, just acknowledgement of fact. That was one of the many reasons being near her felt so perilous. She never tried to own the parts of me that predated her. She simply made them look smaller by comparison. I set my glass down. "I think what hurts most is that for a minute in there, before you arrived, I became the old version of myself." "Did you?" I frowned. It felt like it. Feeling something old is not the same as becoming it. I stared at her. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Take the thing I've turned into a catastrophe and reduce it to a manageable truth." Her mouth curved faintly. "That is one of the advantages of emotional distance." "Distance?" A small silence followed. Interesting. Then she said, "I am calmer than you are." "That is not distance." "No?" "No." The word slipped out more firmly than I intended. Aurelia went very still. The winter garden seemed to hold its breath with her. I suddenly became aware that my heart had started beating too fast for a room this quiet. She looked at me as if weighing whether to continue. Finally she asked, "What would you call it?" I should have said care, affection, respect, anything survivable. Instead, I looked at her bare hands folded loosely in her lap and said nothing at all. The silence expanded. Then, to my immense relief and disappointment, she changed the subject. "Would you like tea?" That nearly made me laugh. "Yes." While she rang for it, I leaned back and tried to calm the riot in my blood. This was the danger with Aurelia. She could step around emotion with such elegance that I sometimes forgot how much was crouched underneath her restraint. Then she would look at me for half a second too long, or say "wife" in that low, controlled voice, and I would remember all at once. Tea arrived. We drank. The night eased around us. Eventually, Aurelia asked, "Do you want to tell me why you agreed to go tonight?" I considered. "Because I was tired of imagining it." She waited. I kept thinking if I avoided her forever, then she'd still own some part of my life. Some future room I couldn't enter. Some old fear I still organized myself around. Mira said if I didn't confront it soon, I'd either keep making excuses or commit a social felony. That also sounds like Mira. I smiled despite myself. She bought me the dress. "It suits you." The compliment was simple. No lingering look, no flirtation. That made it somehow worse. "Thank you." Aurelia set her cup down. "I wish you had not needed to do it alone first." I looked at her sharply. "You would have come if I'd asked." "Yes." No hesitation, no confusion, just yes. A pulse of heat traveled through me before I could stop it. I reached for my tea to hide it. Aurelia's gaze flicked briefly to my throat. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Neither of us acknowledged it. At least not then. We sat until the clock somewhere in the east wing marked midnight. By then the shaking had stopped. The humiliation remained, but no longer owned me. When I rose, Aurelia rose too. At the door of the winter garden, I paused. "Why did you call me that?" She looked at me. "Wife?" "Yes." The title moved through me all over again, tender and dangerous. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. It was accurate. "That's not what I mean." She knew that. We both knew that. Still, she made me ask properly. Curse her for it. I looked down the hall before meeting her eyes again. "You've never used it like that in public." Aurelia was quiet for so long I thought she might refuse the truth. Then she said, "No." "Why tonight?" A shadow of something unreadable crossed her face. "Because she looked at you as if she believed she still had the right." The answer struck low and deep. I swallowed. "And you wanted to correct her?" "Yes." My pulse climbed. There was more. I could hear it in the shape of the silence after. I waited. Finally, she added, very quietly, "And because I did not care for how much I wanted to." That was not a confession. Not fully. It was far more dangerous. Because it was Aurelia admitting to wanting something at all. Neither of us moved. The hall stretched around us in lamplight and old shadows. Then she stepped back half a pace and said, "Good night, Nora." Coward. I nodded. "Good night." I slept badly. Not from nightmares this time. From memory. From Celeste's face under the chandelier. From Aurelia's hand around mine. From wife spoken into my skin like a private brand in a public room. By morning, the story had spread. Of course it had. Society could forgive tax fraud faster than it could forgive the existence of new information. By breakfast, my phone was full of messages from acquaintances I had forgotten I knew. Some wanted gossip. Some wanted to offer support now that support had social value. Some simply said they were delighted to hear I was well. Meaning married. Meaning protected. Meaning attached to a name that mattered enough to change how they positioned themselves around me. I deleted most of them unread. Mira called before 9. "Well?" she demanded. "You're alive." "Barely." "Did she cry?" "Who?" "Celeste." "No." Mira clicked her tongue. "Shame." I laughed despite myself. From the breakfast room windows, I could see the south lawn silvered by morning frost. Aurelia had left early for meetings. She always left a note when she did. Today's was brief. "Your favorite jam is in the pantry because the cook forgot it yesterday. Also, if anyone troublesome contacts you, forward them to Lynn. A." I had read it 3 times already. Lynn was Aurelia's chief of staff, and the quiet mastermind behind half the Voss empire. If Aurelia was the storm, Lynn was the weather map, proving it had all been inevitable. By noon, there was a new problem. Celeste sent flowers. Not apology flowers. Control flowers. A massive arrangement of white orchids and dark roses in a crystal vase, elegant enough to cost more than my first apartment's monthly rent. The note inside read, "We should talk privately before this becomes uglier than necessary. No signature. None needed." I stared at it in the entrance hall until one of the housemaids very delicately asked whether the arrangement should be placed in water. "No," I said. Then, because it felt too weak, "Take it away." Lynn appeared from nowhere 5 minutes later. Lady Aurelia anticipated that response. Did she? She asked that if any unsolicited gifts arrived, I should remind you that we have a service entrance for things meant to leave. I blinked. She anticipated flowers specifically? Lynn's expression remained immaculate. She knows the genre. I laughed so hard I startled myself. The flowers were gone within minutes. An hour later, Celeste called. I let it ring out. Then again, and again. On the 4th attempt, I blocked her. At 2 in the afternoon, a message arrived from an unknown number. You humiliated me in my own home. I stared at the screen until anger finally burned clean through the lingering ache. Then I typed back. No. You attempted to humiliate me in your home and failed. I should not have sent it. I knew that immediately, but the rush of satisfaction was indecent, Celeste replied at once. So this is who you are now. I looked down at the message and thought, no, this is who I was before you taught me silence. I did not send that. Instead, I handed the phone to Lynn when she passed by the library and told her if any further messages arrived, I no longer wished to see them. She accepted the device with a small nod. Understood. That evening, Aurelia came home later than usual. I heard her in the front hall before I saw her. The murmur of low voices, the discreet withdrawal of staff, the click of her shoes on stone. I was in the library pretending to read. When she entered, she glanced at the untouched page in my lap and said, "Difficult chapter?" I smiled reluctantly. Impossible. She took in my face, the abandoned tea, the general atmosphere of controlled irritation. Something happened. It was another one of her gifts and one of her infuriating habits, the ability to state the truth before I had decided whether to admit it. Flowers. From Celeste. How did you know? Aurelia set down her briefcase. Because women like her rarely apologize without decorative weaponry. My smile came easier this time. She also texted. And Lynn confiscated my phone because I was being unwise. Aurelia's brows lifted a fraction. Wise of her. I leaned back in the armchair and exhaled. I hate how quickly this all turns into theater. Aurelia moved to the fire, warming one hand near the flames. That is because the people involved treat reputation as blood sport. She said I humiliated her. At that, Aurelia looked at me directly. You did? I blinked. What? She humiliated herself by underestimating you. You simply declined to assist. The answer was so dry I laughed outright. Some of the tightness in the room disappeared. Aurelia loosened her cuffs and crossed to the drinks cabinet. Do you want brandy? Yes. She poured two. I accepted mine and watched her over the rim. She looked tired in the smallest ways, a trace of strain at the eyes, a slower movement in one shoulder. Board battles, then, or family. In the Voss world, the distinction was often ornamental. Long day? I asked. Her gaze flicked to mine. Yes. I waited. She said nothing more. Also typical. I could press, but I knew better than most how carefully she distributed her burdens. Instead, I said, if you'd rather not discuss mine tonight, I would rather discuss yours than mine. The answer came too quickly to be casual. Something shifted in my chest. You don't always have to rescue me from your own bad day. Aurelia leaned one hip against the desk, glass in hand. Perhaps not. Yet you keep doing it. I'm beginning to suspect I enjoy rescuing you. The room went very still. I stared at her. She took a slow sip of brandy as if she had not just dropped a match into an oil spill. Do you? I asked. Aurelia lowered the glass. When necessary. That sounds evasive. It is evasive. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Then, because perhaps the previous night had broken some internal seal in both of us, she answered more honestly than usual. Because I have no wish to place pressure on a relationship that began as an agreement. I set my glass down carefully. The fire popped. Outside the library windows, the grounds lay dark and silver. Inside, every book seemed suddenly complicit in the fact that Aurelia and I were finally speaking in the dangerous territory we had circled for months. You think honesty would pressure me, I said. I think you have been recovering from one form of coercion for a long time. The answer stripped all vanity from the moment. Not fear of rejection, not emotional cowardice. Care. Excruciating, exacting care. I stood. Aurelia. She did not move. Yes? When you call me wife, does it still feel like part of the agreement? A long silence. Then very softly. No. Every part of me heard that all at once. No, not contract, not convenience. Not only protection. Something else. Something we had both apparently been starving around. I took a step toward her, then another. She set her glass down, slowly enough to tell me she was controlling herself on purpose. Always control, always that impossible leash. I stopped close enough to smell cedar and smoke on her clothes. If I kissed you, I asked, because consent still mattered even here, especially here, would you consider that pressure? For the first time since I had known her, Aurelia Voss looked genuinely shaken. Not outwardly, not in any way another person might notice. But I knew her now. I knew the microsecond pause, the slight widening of her pupils, the new tension in the line of her jaw. Yes, she said. My heart dropped. Then she added, pressure on my self-control. I stared at her. Then I laughed once in disbelief and she actually smiled. God, that smile. Rare enough to be almost mythological. I stepped closer still. If you don't want me to... She touched my wrist, not stopping, grounding. I want you to, she said. Every nerve in my body lit. The kiss should have been slow, sensibly paced, a gradual crossing of all the boundaries we had observed for 8 immaculate months. Instead, it happened the way storms break after oppressive heat. I went to her and she met me halfway, and suddenly the library, the fire, the long dark room, all of it vanished behind the fact of her mouth on mine. She kissed exactly the way she lived. Controlled at first. Precise. Then devastating. One hand at my waist, one at the back of my neck. No hurry, no hesitation. Just the unmistakable force of a woman who had been restraining herself for far longer than either of us intended to admit. I made a small, involuntary sound against her mouth and felt her entire body tense in response. When she pulled back, it was only far enough to breathe. Her forehead touched mine. Nora. I had never heard my name like that. Not even once. Not from anyone. I swallowed. If you stop now, I may hold it against you forever. A low laugh escaped her, rougher than anything I had heard from her before. I had no intention of stopping. The second kiss was worse, better, everything. Years of being touched carelessly by affection, strategically by contract, and painfully by memory had not prepared me for being kissed by someone who took me seriously. Aurelia kissed as if she had listened all these months and learned me through patience before claiming anything at all. By the time she drew back again, both of us were breathing harder. Her hands remained careful, always careful. That nearly undid me more than hunger would have. We should go slowly, she said, the words visibly costing her something. Because you're a saint? Because I am not. I smiled helplessly. She brushed her thumb along my cheekbone. In there last night, she murmured. When she looked at you, all I wanted was to take your hand and leave. Then all I wanted was to turn back and ruin her. Then all I wanted was to bring you home and make sure no one ever got close enough to hurt you again. My throat tightened. That doesn't sound very contractual. No. No, I echoed. The room fell quiet again, but this silence had changed. No longer avoidance. No longer tension without language. A beginning. At dinner, we tried and failed to act normal. The cook, discreet angel that she was, pretended not to notice. The staff pretended even harder. Lynn, when informed the next morning that our legal arrangement had become substantially less theoretical, only said, "That explains several scheduling inefficiencies." I nearly choked on my coffee. Aurelia did not so much as blink. 3 days later, the scandal deepened. A gossip column ran a piece hinting that Celeste Armand's engagement had been overshadowed by the dramatic arrival of a newly acknowledged wife from one of the city's most private dynastic families. The article avoided names but included enough detail to be both obvious and deniable. It described me as a former intimate of the bride-to-be. I wanted to set something on fire. Mira wanted to set the columnist on fire. Aurelia wanted the article removed. The article was removed within the hour. I did not ask how. What I did ask was, is this going to keep happening? Aurelia looked up from the briefing notes on her desk. Yes. The honesty was almost refreshing. I sat in the chair opposite her and sighed. Wonderful. It will diminish. Because attention spans are short? Because I can make them shorter. I narrowed my eyes. That sounded sinister. It was. I should probably have been alarmed by how soothing I found that. Aurelia extended a hand across the desk. I placed mine in it. This, too, had become normal with terrifying speed. A touch between discussions. A passing thumb over knuckles while Lynn reviewed schedules. The quiet intimacy of mornings. The easing open of nights. We had not rushed anything beyond that first kiss. But everything after it seemed to deepen with impossible inevitability. The staff adjusted. The house adjusted. I adjusted. Sometimes I caught myself crossing the hall toward her rooms before remembering she now came to mine as often as I went to hers. And that sent a private smile through me I was not yet dignified enough to conceal. "What are you thinking?" she asked. That I'm becoming annoyingly happy. Aurelia considered this. "I can arrange a problem if you prefer balance." I laughed. "Please don't." "Very well." Her thumb brushed the inside of my wrist. The touch sent a small, clean heat through me. That was another dangerous thing. We were not merely emotionally compromised. We were mated by scent in every practical way two women living in close quarters could become before formal claiming. Not marked, not bitten, nothing so final. But the house smelled like us now, like cedar and storm and honeyed tea and winter jasmine and the strange, intimate sweetness of a bond taking shape under restraint. I noticed it most in the mornings when I woke with her beside me. Not always, still not every night. We were building carefully, yet often enough that absence had begun to feel like interruption. A week after the engagement party, Celeste requested a meeting through intermediaries. Not with me, with Aurelia. That infuriated me more than if she had reached directly. "She thinks she can negotiate the narrative," Mira said over lunch in the city. "Or intimidate." "She can try." Mira stabbed her salad with hostility. "I still think you should let me leak that she cried in the cloakroom." "She didn't cry." "She looked like she might have. It counts." I laughed. We were at a quiet restaurant tucked behind the conservatory, one of the few places where the staff knew how to look blind around famous names. Mira reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Are you okay? Really?" The question softened me immediately. "Yes," I said. And then, because Mira deserved truth. "More than okay, actually, which feels suspicious." Mira's eyes narrowed with delighted predation. "Oh. Oh? You've crossed from wounded dignity into glowing denial." "I have not." "You have." She leaned back smugly. "Tell me everything." I should have resisted. Instead, I told her enough to make her squeal loud enough that two nearby diners turned. She covered her mouth and laughed into her napkin. "I knew it." "Everyone apparently knew it before we did." "Of course we did. The whole house knew. The gardeners knew. The gargoyles on the roof knew." I groaned. It was not that obvious. Mira's expression was almost pitying. Nora, she looked at you like a woman trying not to build a cathedral in your name. I stared at her. That is absurd. It is precise. Before I could answer, someone paused at our table. I looked up and felt the world sour. Celeste. No diamonds today. No engagement smile. Just a camel coat, dark glasses pushed into her hair, and the sort of exquisite composure that suggested she had rehearsed being the reasonable party. Mira's hand tightened around her fork like she might genuinely stab. Celeste ignored her. Nora. I rose halfway out of my chair before deciding I would not stand for her. What do you want? 5 minutes. No. She exhaled through her nose. People around us had begun the subtle pretending not to watch routine. I hated that we apparently could not occupy the same postal code without becoming content. Please, she said, and I almost laughed from the novelty of hearing that word from her. Mira looked between us. I can leave. No, I said immediately. Celeste's mouth tightened. I'd prefer privacy. Then you should have cultivated it when it was available. Her gaze snapped to mine. There it was, the old spark. Annoyance mixed with unwilling respect. Finally, she said, I just want to understand. Mira made a scandalized noise. Understand what? That actions have consequences? I reached for my water before I said something less elegant. Celeste lowered her voice. You married Aurelia Voss. Yes. When? Months ago. And you said nothing. I set the glass down. Again, you were not someone I could tell. Her eyes flashed. You've said that already. Because it remains true. A beat of silence. Then Celeste did something I had not expected. She looked tired, genuinely tired, not humbled, not sympathetic, just frayed in a way her grooming could not conceal. Do you love her? She asked. Mira nearly choked. The restaurant receded. All the ambient noise, the clink of silverware, the filtered daylight through the windows, everything narrowed to that one impossible question from the least entitled person alive to ask it. I met Celeste's gaze. Yes. It was the first time I had said it aloud. Not to myself in fragments. Not to Mira in implication. Yes. Celeste went still. Not dramatic. Not shattered. Just briefly without language. Then she looked down. A small, almost invisible defeat moved through her shoulders. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt closure. Simple. Unexpected. Merciful. When she looked up again, some of the sharpness had gone. Then I suppose I was too late. I held her gaze. No. The word surprised even me. She frowned. You were never late, Celeste. I heard Mira go completely silent beside me. I continued because the truth had arrived, and I was suddenly too tired to soften it. You were there on time. You just chose yourself every single time it mattered. The blow landed. This time there was no audience laughter to hide in. No mother, no fiancé, no ballroom lighting to flatter cruelty into sophistication. Just daylight and truth. Celeste's mouth parted once, then closed. At last she nodded, a small movement, almost respectful. I deserved that. Yes, Mira said brightly. Celeste ignored her. To me, she said, For what it's worth, I didn't send those flowers as a threat. No? No. What then? Her eyes held mine. Cowardice, probably. For a moment, I saw it. The woman she might have been if she had ever chosen discomfort over approval. Then it passed. I hope she makes you impossible, Celeste said softly. I blinked. What? A sad, faint smile touched her mouth. Aurelia, I hope she ruins your tolerance for half-love. Then she turned and walked out before I could answer. Mira stared after her for a long time. Well, she said finally, that was nauseatingly mature of everyone except me. I let out a breath I had not known I was holding. She looked terrible. Good. Yet I knew what I had seen. Not redemption, not reunion, just the first honest consequence she had ever had to wear in daylight. When I told Aurelia that evening, she listened without interruption. We were in her study. Rain moved softly against the windows. She stood by the mantel, one hand in her pocket, the other holding a cup of tea she had not yet drunk. At the end, she asked only, "Did she upset you?" "No." "Did she threaten you?" "No." "Did she attempt to persuade you otherwise?" I smiled. "No." Aurelia nodded once. "Then I am content to leave her alive." I laughed so hard I had to set my own cup down. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." I stood and crossed to her. The study had become one of our rooms now, though the house still contained dozens. I touched the front of her shirt lightly. She asked if I love you. Aurelia's gaze sharpened. "And?" I said yes. The room went still. She said nothing. For one wild instant, I wondered if I had moved too far, too quickly, shattered some last fragile balance we had been maintaining. Then Aurelia set down her tea and reached for me with both hands. When she spoke, her voice was rough in a way I had only heard at night and never in full light. "Say it again." My breath caught. I smiled slowly. "I love you." The expression that crossed her face then was not one I will ever have language for. Not surprise. She had known, perhaps. Not relief entirely. Something deeper. The terrible quiet breaking of a woman who had survived too much alone and no longer intended to. She pulled me to her and kissed me with a reverence that made my knees weak. When she lifted her head, she pressed her forehead to mine and said, "I have loved you since the winter garden, and before that I was merely losing the argument." I stared at her. "That was months ago." "Yes." "And you just lived with that?" Aurelia's mouth curved very slightly. "I am unusually disciplined." "Deranged," I corrected. "Perhaps." I laughed and kissed her again. From there, everything changed without changing at all. The house remained the same. The routines remained. But love named itself, and therefore moved more openly through the rooms. She slept in my suite more often than not. Sometimes I woke in the night and found her watching me, not creepily, just with the solemn disbelief of someone still adjusting to joy. We fought exactly once over nothing. A scheduling misunderstanding. A cancelled dinner. I accused her of retreating into work whenever emotion threatened to become too visible. She accused me of waiting too long to say when I was hurt and then expecting telepathy. We both sulked for 3 hours. Then Lady Sabine Voss, who had somehow learned of the dispute before either of us finished processing it, called to inform Aurelia that, if you lose that girl over professional habits, I will outlive you solely to make the point. Reconciliation followed quickly. By spring, the city had found fresher scandals. Celeste married Vivian in a ceremony tasteful enough to be boring. We did not attend. Aurelia sent a donation to a women's shelter in their name instead. I loved her viciously for that. There were still moments when old hurt caught me by surprise. A song, a scent, a gala invitation embossed too similarly. But each time the memory rose, it met a life so much larger than the wound that the wound shrank a little more. One evening in late April, Aurelia brought me to the Sea House. Not because of an event, not because of family, just because the weather was clearing and she said I looked like someone who needed horizon. The house stood above a cliff north of the city, all glass and stone and wind. We arrived at dusk. The ocean below was slate blue and endless. Inside, the rooms were simpler than the main estate, less ceremonial, more hers. Books stacked unaligned, a blanket left over the sofa, a half-finished chess game by the window. I wandered while she lit the fire. When I found her again on the terrace, the wind was pulling at her hair, and the last of the sunset was burning along the waterline. She turned as I stepped outside. Then she held out a coat for me without a word. I smiled and let her settle it over my shoulders. You always know when I'm cold. You always pretend you are not. Terrible habit. Yes. We stood together at the railing. Below us, the waves struck rock with patient force. I thought of the ballroom, of the corridor afterward, of the black car and the first time I cried into her coat. It felt like another life. Aurelia rested her forearms on the rail. I spoke to the jeweler, she said. I glanced at her. What jeweler? The family one. Something in her tone made my pulse slow and quicken at once. I turned fully toward her. The wind moved between us. Aurelia, very carefully, reached into her coat pocket and drew out a small velvet box. No grand flourish, no kneeling, nothing theatrical. Just the most serious woman I had ever known, holding out a future with both hands. Nora, she said, and my name in her mouth still felt like home being built in real time. Our marriage began as a shield. Then it became a life. Then, without consulting either of us properly, it became everything I had once convinced myself I did not need. I could not breathe. Her eyes never left mine. I do not want convenience from you anymore. I do not want gratitude, or agreement, or a careful continuation of what already exists. I want to ask you properly, with full knowledge and no contract hiding beneath the words. She opened the box. Inside lay a ring of old platinum and pale fire, elegant and severe and devastatingly beautiful. The Voss family style. Understated until light hit it, then impossible to ignore. Will you marry me? She said. For love this time? I laughed and cried at once. It was an undignified sound. She looked so alarmed by my tears that I loved her more for it. Yes, I managed. Then louder, because women like Aurelia deserved certainty. Yes. Her whole body changed, not visibly to others, perhaps. To me, unmistakably. Relief. Joy. A near unraveling swiftly mastered. She slipped the ring onto my hand with fingers steadier than mine. Then I grabbed the lapels of her coat and kissed her before she could say anything elegant enough to ruin the moment. When we finally broke apart, she was smiling openly. Openly. I touched her face just to be sure she was real. You realize, I said breathlessly, we are already married. Yes. So this was just you being romantic in a terrifyingly efficient way. I can be romantic. You can be lethal. This appears adjacent. She laughed. The sound was so rare and warm that the entire sea seemed to brighten around it. Then she took my hand and turned it so the ring caught the last red of sunset. It suits you, she murmured. So do you, I said. Later, wrapped in blankets before the fire, I asked the question that had lingered since the ballroom all those months ago. When you walked in that night, were you angry? Aurelia looked up from where my feet rested in her lap. With Celeste? With anyone. Everyone. Me. Never with you. I smiled. And the rest? Her gaze returned to the fire. I was angry that you had needed armor before I arrived. The answer moved through me slowly. Then she added, I was also angry that when she insulted you, my first instinct was not civilized. I arched a brow. How uncivilized? Aurelia considered. Exceptionally. I laughed. Such detail. I am protecting your peace. I leaned over and kissed her temple. My peace is very impressed. She caught my hand and pressed her mouth to the ring. A simple gesture, utterly ruinous. Outside, the sea kept throwing itself against the rocks below, relentless and patient and alive. Inside, the fire settled into embers. I rested my head against the sofa and thought of all the ways a life can change without fanfare. A cream envelope. A ballroom. A public cruelty. A woman walking through a door at exactly the right moment. If Celeste had not tried to humiliate me, perhaps I would still have believed that closure needed an apology to be complete. I knew better now. Closure was not watching the person who hurt you finally understand your worth. Closure was realizing their understanding no longer mattered. Aurelia glanced at me. What are you thinking? That once upon a time I believed being chosen publicly was the greatest proof of love. And now, I looked at her, at the woman who had chosen me in hallways and libraries and winter gardens and quiet mornings before she ever did it in a ballroom. Now I think being loved well in private is what teaches you how to survive public things. Something softened in her expression so deeply it almost hurt to witness. She set aside the book she had not really been reading and drew me into her lap. I went willingly. Always now. Her arms settled around me. Warm, certain, home. You were never difficult to choose, she murmured against my hair. They simply lacked the courage to keep choosing. I closed my eyes. The ring on my hand glinted in the firelight. The sea continued its long conversation with stone. And somewhere far behind us, in another season of my life, a woman stood under chandeliers asking who invited her, never understanding that the answer had changed the moment I stopped believing I needed permission to belong. I belonged to myself first, then to the life I built. Then, gladly and with full heart, to the woman who had walked into a room full of wolves, taken my hand, and taught the whole world the truth by speaking it aloud. Wife. And this time, forever meant exactly what it said.